And welcome back to Chicago Bulls Insider. Today we're talking about NBA draft prospect Alex Toohey and if the Chicago Bulls should be looking to potentially draft him in the second round of this upcoming NBA draft. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Monis Mazelis, slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. So make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. So with that being said, let's go ahead. Let's jump into it. We're talking about a potential sleeper pick in Alex Toohey and if the Chicago Bulls should be interested in selecting him in the second round of this upcoming NBA draft. And so if you're not familiar with him, Alex Toohey did play in Australia. He's listed at 6'8", 223. He's 20 years old. He has a 6'10" wingspan. He also has a 8'8" standing reach and a 31.5 vertical. And he played for the Sydney Kings in the NBL. And so we're going to be looking at his numbers. We're going to look at the pros. We're going to be looking at the cons. We're going to look at the player comparison and just really what he could potentially turn into if he pans out in the NBA and if this makes sense for the Chicago Bulls to take him potentially in the second round. And so let's go ahead. Let's start with the numbers. And so I think that the first key aspect when you take a look at the numbers is you see a player that got progressively better. And so I think that when you're talking about a young prospect like Toohey getting better in year two, you know, you have got to love the fact that if he gets into your building and then you go ahead and you continue to develop him, he might be in line for another big jump here. And so when you look at the numbers, let's start with the points per game, because I think that it was solid, not anything that was great, but 10.6 points per game. So you like the fact that it gets to the double figures there. 0.8 with the blocks, 1.4 with the steals, 1.3 with the assist, 4 rebounds a game, 72% from the free throw line, shot 31% from three, and then 44.9% from the field. So solid numbers, and you get a chance to see that he took a little bit of a leap there in year two. And so next, let's go ahead. Let's jump into the pros and really the things that I love about him, just watching the highlights and things like that. So I think the first thing that really kind of comes off the page for me is you will see a guy that plays with a terrific motor. I think that his effort is certainly there. I think that you see it on the offense and the defensive end. And so I love the fact that he plays with a high motor, a high level of energy. And I think that for me, I just think of a player that you just love his will and you feel like that his skill can get there, because if you have a player that has the will, the skill will follow. So I like that about him with the high motor. And so the next thing that I love about him is just when you look at the highlights, you see a player that could really play in tempo. I think that he showed that he will take it off of the rebound and he will get it into transition. He's very comfortable dribbling the basketball. And when looking at that, I think about how that could potentially translate to the Chicago Bulls. And that's huge because that is what they have talked about. At least that's what the rumors are, that they want to get players that will fit their scheme. And so he's a player that certainly could fit the scheme. I could see him out there with our guards, filling the lane, and I could also see him taking it off the board and pitching it ahead to Josh Giddey or whoever else and getting things going. And if they're not on the floor, he's certainly capable of taking it down to get the fast break going. And so I do like that from a scheme standpoint. I think he could fit there. Next, I think he's terrific off the ball. And I think that he's terrific off the ball because he uses his basketball IQ. I think that he has a high basketball IQ that he uses on the offense and the defensive side of the ball, which we're going to talk about that in a moment. But I think he understands what's going on from a floor balance standpoint. I think he understands what's happening with the position of his defender. And so I think that he understands just really the spacing there. And so I think that that is what you want, especially when you're trying to open it up in the half court things and stuff like that. So that tells me that this is a player that could do more than just be a person that's just going to depend on the transition game. And so I like that about him, his ability to become available, being a cutter and making the right plays that way to make the rest of the team better. And so the next thing for him is that I liked is really his shot mechanics. And so I think that he has a smooth shot. And so even though he only shot 31% from downtown and the 72% from the free throw line, like it's definitely a jumper that looks good. I think it's more so just coming down to development, which is going to be big for him. We'll talk about that even more because I do think that with some development here, this is a player that could certainly turn into something, especially from a rotational standpoint. So he does have a very nice shot mechanic. And so, when he misses and then he goes cold and things like that, it's not because of poor shot mechanics. And so because of that, I think it's something that you could certainly work with. And so the next thing, as far as being a playmaker, he is a willing passer, and he seems like a player that is always trying to find his teammate. And so I love the fact that he's unselfish there. He seems to be a player that could really be a player that's a connector in the half court offense. And so when you talk about that, alongside of what we already have with a Josh Giddey, also to what we are going to have with Lonzo Ball, assuming that we're not trading him and he's coming back, like that's definitely, I think, something that this team would want. They want the ball to continue to keep hopping and moving. And I think that he's a player that can come in and continue that. And so once again, you're talking about a player that would really fit your style. And so he's not going to wow you with some type of spectacular pass or anything like that. And he doesn't have to, because he makes solid passes that, again, will get to the teammate to either knock down a shot, or he's going to make the hockey play where he's going to push it to one player, they'll push it to the next, and then you get a score out of that. And so he's willing to do that. And so next, defensively, this was probably the best thing that I liked about him, because when you're talking about a high motor, I saw several efforts with him. And as a player that loves defense, especially when I'm going out and playing and just looking at it in the NBA, I love players that will lock in defensively. He seems to have that key defensively. I thought that he showed that he could be a player that could switch onto a guard. He shows that he could also switch back to a big. Now, one of the things that's going to be, a challenge for him, which we'll talk about that with the weakness here, is going to be just the lateral quickness. So the speed there, he's not just necessarily the biggest athlete, but man, he competes his tail off. And I think that he uses his length to really keep players in front of him. And I thought that also too, within the highlights, when you look at it defensively, you can see a player that's coaching back there. And when I say that, he's like a quarterback on the defensive end saying, hey, watch this, hedge here, watch back door. Like, you could tell that he's communicating like that. And so I like that as a defensive anchor, especially when you're talking about a rotational piece. So I love that. I think he makes terrific reads defensively. So he understands if he's sitting down, he sees somebody coming up, his teammate is late, he's going to pop up and get on that player that's coming off the screen and make sure he's communicated to the player that's behind. You take mine. And so I see that with him. So the reads are there. I think he's going to be able to use his length as well to get into the passing lanes and things like that. And so he knows how to use that length. And so again, defensively, I think that that's really the plus in his game. And I think that that's something that immediately could translate. Now, the next thing we're talking about here is the weakness for him. And so I just talked about the lateral quickness and the speed. He's going to be going against players that are much more craftier. So, when you're switching out on a Jalen Brunson, then that's where it's going to be interesting for him. Now, I love the fact that he has the high motor and he wants to do it. And so it's the question of, will he be able to use that motor and that length to keep a player in front or to make it challenging enough to where the defense can rotate and help him out or whatnot. And so that's going to be the question there for him, but he competes his tail off. And so I think the next thing for him is he's just not a mid-range shooter. And so he's not a player that is going to look to pull up and get to the mid-range right now. I think that that's something that you want him to add a little bit more dimension to his game offensively. He's not necessarily a player that you're going to give him the basketball and you say, be a shot creator. Like, he's not one that's going to try to open it up that way and he needs to probably get a bit more tighter with the handle. I think it's solid, but it's not to the point where you would trust him to go out there and break a play down and individually get to the rim that way. And so that leads me to the next point as far as getting to the rim. He can use his frame and get to the rim, but he didn't necessarily finish the way that you wanted him to. Would like to see him play a lot more stronger at the rim. And what I mean by that is, as far as just like going up for maybe a dunk versus going up for the layups and things like that. Because don't get me wrong, he is not going to shy away from the contact. Like, he wants to get the contact. He's totally fine with that. It looks like in the highlights and things like that, which is one of the things that I love about him, is that he's not going to shy away from the contact. I think it's more so making defenses pay when he gets to the lane and he does get that contact. And so I think that's another thing there. So that maybe leads into maybe a little bit of a strength and balance type of issue there with him. And then next, when you talk about the 3-point shooting at only 31%, he's only going to be, I think, a catch and shoot player right now. And so the mechanics, again, they look good, but it's more so he's going to have to convert at a high level, because right now, teams would probably dare him to shoot that 3 ball. So he's going to have to get a lot more solid there. And so those are really the weaknesses that I see for him right now as a player. And so when you look at the player comparisons, and there's a couple players that come to mind, and it's interesting that 2 of these players remind me of former Chicago Bulls players. And so the first player that he reminds me of is Onuralp Batim. And so I think that he reminds me of him, just the way that he could be really a knockdown shooter from the outside. I want to see him maybe use that length and be able to go ahead and not worry so much about the contest and things like that. And I think that that's kind of what Onuralp Batim was able to do at times, is like he could make difficult 3-point shots. But as far as the athleticism, definitely Onuralp Batim, because this guy could certainly dunk it with the best of them. But, he reminds me of that type of player. He also reminds me of Andres Nocioni, and he reminds me of that because of the energy level that he plays with and the multiple efforts. And so I like that about him. And this is why I would say in the second round, again, we're talking about a player that his skills would need to catch up. But, man, he has the will, and I think the skills could certainly catch up there. And this reminds me of the next player that's currently playing in the league. Believe he's with the Atlanta Hawks right now because he got traded by the Cavs. But Niang, I think that he reminds me of Niang, who has been a solid rotational piece. And this is exactly what I could see with Alex Toohey. And so the bottom line, when it comes down to Alex Toohey, what I see is I see a player that plays with a high motor, has a terrific basketball IQ, and I think that he's a catch and pass type of player. I think he's a catch and shoot type of player. I think he's in between being a 3 and a 4, like he's in between that. We'll see what happens if he gets a little bit more quicker, and he can definitely be solid there. But I think that that's where he is from a positional standpoint of 3 and a 4. But I think he can be a solid rotational piece. And so that's what I like about him. If you're picking him in the second round, I think he could pan out to be a solid rotational piece. And for what we wanted with Patrick Williams, a guy that would come in and defend, I think that you could see that with him, especially if he can get that quickness too. Like, I could definitely see him taking off on that side of the floor. He's definitely that catch and shoot. If he could just add a little bit more dimension to his game offensively, you might have something there in the second round. And so anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here what you guys are thinking about Alex Toohey. Do you feel like that the Chicago Bulls should take a chance with him? Pick 45 in the second round of this upcoming NBA draft. And so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. And as we always say, look, go Bulls, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.